Hey there, folks! After I did my list of underrated Game Boy Advance games, I got to thinking about how every system has its awesome but forgotten titles, and decided it would be fun to follow it up with a list of DS games. It was inherently kind of a weird system, the first to use two screens and a touchscreen for gameplay mechanics, and that led to a lot of different takes on popular series, or creative and experimental new gameplay types. They certainly weren't all winners, and some series translated better than others, but I don't think anyone can deny that there were some amazing things accomplished on that little handheld. And I played what seemed like every DS game back in the day thanks to the magic of flash cartridges. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. Just pirate talk, matey. But you're not here for my rambling, you're here for the games. So,
Stop that. It tickles.
uh...
I'm trying to record a video down here. Do you mind?
I swear, I hear some... Whoa.
I said, stop poking me.
What's going on here? What are you doing down there?
Huh? Seems like we got caught in some kind of dual screen video bit. Except I got the short end of the stick because I'm down here with this poorly implemented touch gimmick.
Well, your nonsense is affecting me too. We gotta sync up. That's how all this dual screen stuff works. So, sort it out down there or you'll ruin the whole video.
Sorry. These shoehorned touch controls always take some getting used to. Let's try again, okay?
Sorry about that. I think we can get on with it now. Cue the intro. This is probably one of the more popular games on this list, I'll admit, but it also came out extremely early in the DS lifecycle, and I think that aside from early adopters like myself, a lot of people skipped it over once the flood of more anticipated games started to hit the system. When it came out, it was pretty much just the launch games like Mario 64 DS and Nintendogs, but by the end of the first year of the DS lifecycle, a lot of these early titles were already forgotten, so I think it's still worth noting for what it did with the Kirby series classic gameplay. Whereas most titles before this were traditional platformers focused on sucking in enemies and using their powers to solve simple puzzles, this one was all about guiding Kirby along a track that you created with the stylus, tapping him to dash into enemies and get powers, or break blocks to make progress. This seems like a simple concept, but it almost becomes a rhythm game at times when you're trying to keep track of Kirby while also stunning enemies and drawing lines. The levels are short enough to not get boring, and the art style is charming but simple in a way that still holds up despite being an early DS game. It was popular enough to get a sequel on the Wii U, but that game felt slow, overlong, and devoid of a lot of the charm of this game, so it's still worth calling attention to this little forgotten DS gem. Okay. So, half of you right now are probably scoffing at this choice in disgust, while the other half goes, huh? What's that? But hear me out. I'm not a huge Sonic fan, I've said that before, but I enjoy the games that do something different, and this one is about as different as they come. It's a touchscreen controlled, turn-based RPG made by BioWare. Yes, that BioWare. It even has the classic dialogue tree options, even if they don't have a huge impact on character interactions throughout the game. It also has all your favorite Sonic characters as playable party members, each with unique skills they can use in and out of battle. Basically, in the main map you wander around guided by the stylus, tapping points of interest to activate certain character abilities, such as Sonic's Dash or Amy's Hammer. And when you run into an enemy on the map, it takes you to a battle screen where each character has normal attacks and special attacks that trigger rhythm-based minigames to decide how powerful the attack is. These can be pretty challenging, but the attack animations are really nice, and getting a full-powered special attack can feel really satisfying, in a similar way to the Mario & Luigi special attack system. The actual story of the game plays out in talking head fashion, with the aforementioned limited dialogue choices, and the story itself is honestly pretty much nonsense, but If you love these characters, there are some really fun moments between them, and it's just cool to see them interact in a different kind of game than usual. It received pretty middling reviews back in the day, which is why it was all but forgotten after release, but it's at least worth knowing about because of the risks it took with the Sonic formula, and the cool little BioWare touches they integrated into it. Let me start off by saying that I absolutely loved this game when it came out. This was the time when the Metroid series was truly in its, well, prime. And the idea of a truly first-person adventure game on the go made me very happy during a time when I was spending a lot of time on a bus for school trips, and I hated being like a normal high school kid. While they obviously had to make some sacrifices to the prime formula in order to get it working on weaker hardware and fewer buttons, the game still felt like the GameCube games I loved back then. In fact, when I was originally compiling this list, I thought it would be way higher, but when I was recording it, there were some glaring faults that held it back. For one, there's no actual map of the area, only a radar on the bottom screen that you usually cover up anyway because of controlling the view with the stylus, and since a lot of the hallways and transitional rooms in the game look very similar, it can be very easy to lose track of direction, especially in rooms where you get locked in and have to kill all the enemies before continuing. And since each area has a kill the boss and then beat the clock back to the spaceship moment, this problem can be made much worse if you spend too long running back where you just came from as time ticks down. There's also not the usual satisfaction of getting more powerful, since aside from missile and energy tanks, the only upgrades in the game are new beams to open different colored doors, so it has more of a simple mission structure to it. And each planet sees Samus returning to a lot of the same rooms, which can get tedious by the end. But, technical limitations aside, there was just something special about this game that I don't think gets enough credit in the modern day, as people clamor for all the Metroid they can get in an era where it seems like the entire series had been forgotten for years, not just this game in the series. And since it's the only Metroid game in the series for the DS... Hey, bottom screen? Can you clear this garbage off the screen for me?
On it.
Thanks. As I was saying, since it's the only Metroid game for the DS, and it seems like no one really talks about it when they mention how great Metroid is, I'd be remiss not to give it a shout out. While I have to acknowledge this is probably the best-selling game on this list, it's also an example of another game firmly in the category of forgotten entry in a popular series. A lot of people have claimed over the years that the only good Yoshi game is the original Yoshi's Island for the SNES. And while arguably it's still the best one, they're blatantly ignoring how great not only this game is, but also Yoshi's Woolly World for the Wii U, and to a lesser extent Yoshi's Story on the N64. But maybe we'll get to that in a future list. Yoshi's Island DS, though, continued the greatness of its nostalgic 90s prequel, but with some added mechanics that made use of the DS without overusing its gimmicks. The two screens work as one tall view, allowing for increased verticality in the game, and more interesting placement of collectibles such as the floating red coins and out-of-reach flowers. This was slightly complicated by the dead zone between the screens because aiming an egg that far took trigonometry proficiency that the average person just frankly should not have. But in most cases, the increased screen real estate was just used to see, and you could still get close enough to the collectibles to not have to aim that far. The other major change to the format was the inclusion of new babies that had different abilities, such as Baby Peach and her parasol float, and Baby DK and his vine climbing and increased strength. This baby switching mechanic opened up a lot of clever new puzzle options and made the game feel a lot different from other attempts to capitalize on the Yoshi brand, such as Yoshi's New Island on 3DS that brought nothing new to the table and was just a boring cash-in. While this game had some aiming issues and the baby switching mechanic could sometimes lead to frustrating backtracking moments, the new ideas it brought to the table still provided it with more merit than it ever earned, and anyone who says the only good Yoshi game is the first one would do well to broaden their horizons, because this is a great, though flawed, entry in the series. Okay, if I told you there was an official sequel to Final Fantasy XII on the DS, would you have any idea what I was talking about? I bet most people wouldn't, because even when it released it wasn't terribly popular, and since then it's been all but forgotten in the pantheon of Final Fantasy lore. But it was a canon follow-up developed by Square that followed Vaughn and Penelope Penelope? Whatever. Followed Vaughn and his partner's further adventures as sky pirates with a new crew. Fan favorite characters still had appearances, but it mostly focused on a new band of adventurers, led by Vaughn, and was also an entirely different type of game. It played like a more simplified version of a real-time strategy game, where the party leaders, along with various monsters they could summon to fight with them, were sent into battle as groups on different maps. It had kind of a rock, paper, scissors type mechanic with melee, aerial, and range fighters, and a modified version of the Gambit system, where you could set an auto ability for each party member when they got in range of an enemy. Summon monsters were also split into one of these three categories, and were the traditional troops spawned from barracks and other RTS games. The different gameplay style wasn't my favorite back in the day, but the game had a new 2.5D art style that I thought looked really good, along with new cinematic cutscenes that pushed the limits of the DS. Plus, anyone that loved Final Fantasy XII and wanted more from these characters could do a lot worse than playing this game. Just know going in that it's not a traditional RPG. It is a logical transition from the Final Fantasy XII battle system though, because you're still doing a lot of party management outside of battle, and then letting them mostly fight for themselves, though you can select individual troops to do things like heal or trigger other special attacks, and it makes good use of the touchscreen to navigate the battlefield. It was certainly a unique type of experimental gameplay to follow up a game that already took a lot of risks with the Final Fantasy formula, and I think it worked, even though a lot of people didn't seem to take notice. This might be another weird pick, but trust me, it's better than it sounds. This is actually the sequel to another DS spin-off, Altair Chronicles, which was a pretty clunky port of a mobile game. This one drastically improved the engine and played much more like a traditional 2D platformer game, but with the same combat and stealth mechanics of its console big brother. Each level was about traversing from one side to the other, but there would be multiple paths to get there, and your use of parkour skills would spell the difference between the generally safer and faster rooftop path, or the riskier and more stealth-focused ground option. Though some missions mix things up and tasks you with either getting somewhere without being seen or rushing to beat the clock. The controls are fluid and simple enough that anyone can feel like a parkour god, and combat had a good amount of depth, from stealth kills to counters, that it never felt like just a boring hack and slash. And the fact that it's a side-scroller meant that they couldn't screw up the 3D navigation like the proper games in the series seem to these days. Also, for a handheld spin-off, it had an impressive amount of voice acting in the cutscenes between levels, even if the DS compression doesn't sound great.
I'm flattered, but let's not turn this into a habit.
Judge me all you want for putting a Zelda game on a list of underrated video games, but in this case it really is true. This is the second DS Zelda game, following the just awful Phantom Hourglass, and I think that entry turned a lot of people off from Zelda games on the DS. Spirit Tracks sold literally half as well as Phantom Hourglass did, I think largely because it looked and controlled very similar to that one, and I could understand people not being interested, but awkward control scheme aside, this game had a lot to offer. For one, the train mechanic it introduced was just fun. Way more fun than drawing a path for a ship to sail and then just waiting. Link travels along the tracks in some very well-rendered landscapes, and as other trains move along the tracks as well, Link has to stay alert and plan the route accordingly, switching at different intersections or changing speed to not crash, while also being aware of enemies attacking the train or animals blocking the rails. It's a more active mode of travel, and also feels like a better use of the touchscreen because you can still just draw your path, but you have to be aware as you go. Aside from my love of trains in the game, it also improved the dungeon between a dungeon concept of Phantom Hourglass by not forcing you to do the entire tower each time, which massively slowed down the pace of Phantom Hourglass. And Spirit Tracks has a more compelling story that feels like a more interesting sequel to Wind Waker concept than what Phantom Hourglass tried to do, because it's a few years later, civilization has been reestablished, and they talk about a lot of the ancestors that founded the land. There's even a few cameos from familiar-looking characters from this Wind Waker expanded universe, if you can call it that. I also really enjoyed the villain of this game, because he's just so obvious from the start, but also a really absurd design that reminds me of Triforce Heroes and its ridiculous, fashion-themed plot. But, to sum it up quickly, nothing good can come from a tiny man wearing two hats. That's really all you gotta say. He also has a legitimately awesome sidekick, so there's that. Combine all of that with the fact that Zelda plays a much bigger part in this game, which I'm always a fan of, and you have something more than just a quick sequel cash-in to one of the worst games in the entire series. It feels like a lot of heart and creativity went into making this game stand out on its own, even if it was built on the same engine as the one before it. Though I might just be a sucker for the underdog story, since I like Majora's Mask more than Ocarina of Time. But the great use of cutscenes in this game, combined with the creative use of the touchscreen and puzzles, and the unique mode of transportation, make this an underrated Zelda game that shouldn't be dismissed just because it's on the DS, and it controls kind of weird. Though I'll admit, the Spirit Flute is dumb because it uses the microphone. And I don't only say that just because it prevented me from recording very much of the game, it's also just actually dumb. And that's it. That's my list. I know, it's almost all popular Nintendo series, but hey, I'm nothing if not a Nintendo shill. Okay, you got me, I'm just kidding. About that being the whole list, not about being a Nintendo shill. I totally am. I'd accept a sponsorship if they offer, but they won't, because I use ROMs too much. Oops. But anyway, this is just the first half. There's much more obscure stuff to come. And hey, cut me some slack. The DS was like 90% Pokemon games and awful licensed titles. Look it up. Plus, I didn't want to use any I'd mentioned before, like Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions or Tony Hawk American Skateland. But, what do you think of this half? Anything I missed? Please let me know in the comments below, and if you get mad about any that are actually going to be in the top 7, I'm just going to laugh and not tell you that you nailed it. But, until next time, this is your Nintendo shill, signing off. Hi.
I hate DS gimmicks.
I just figured since news of Virtual Console on the Switch hasn't been great so far, it might be fun to reminisce some more about some games that are readily available to play through other means. Oh, that was a pirate wink. I realized that was probably confusing, but yeah, I might as well give these unknown gems some pirate love, since Nintendo isn't getting around to letting us buy them anytime soon. Oh, I'm sorry, Reggie, please don't terminate me.